somebody new coming on board on the project team, probably in a couple months. I expect to be on this job for the long haul. So it's been a great opportunity. You know, we have an amazing project team that I think a lot of you have engaged with and can attest to that. So it's been a real honor for me to be working on it, and I look forward to continuing that. And if you ever have any questions, you can call me or email me.
Hi,
my name is JC McCauley.
I'm McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
That's all I've got, and I'm going to turn over to Casey Harden, Trans Systems, for our presentation tonight.
Thanks, Andy. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we are here today to have what we call a local roads working session. So this will actually be the third one of these types of meetings we've had over about the last year. And the real purpose is to have us present to you some background information on where we're at in the design process, show you again where we think we're headed with this lowered highway alternative, and discuss some of the next steps of work for us. And then kind of open it up back to you guys to talk about some of the specific areas you'd like to delve into. I know there was a Hartford Current article last week that touched on CT Fast Track, that touched on the multimodal station. We'd really like to keep the focus today on the local roads. There'll be ample time for everybody to come to other meetings like this and hear more about those other exciting modes. No decisions are going to be made that you're going to miss in that intervening time period. So I'm just going to summarize those two working sessions we held last year. The first one, they were both in this building. The first one was in August. This is the one we'd allotted about an hour. Congressman Larson gave a little presentation about some of his ideas that took away some of the time we intended to spend talking about local roads. We were asked to follow up. We did get to talk a little bit about, in particular, that Trident area, the idea of discontinuing Broad Street through there. So we did draw some good feedback from that. Then in October, we had another working session. We actually marketed this as a multimodal station area working session. And we did spend about a half or about an hour of that time talking about local roads, but there was a real focus in the eastern section of our project area. You can maybe see on this map, we had 4 general focus points. We were talking a lot about that new Garden Street connection, the Asylum Hill roadway network, the Trident, as well as that area down by Bushnell Park. So we did spend a little bit of time, but not a ton, over on the western section of the corridor, and we were asked by Jennifer at the last PAC meeting to redo one of these. So we're happy you've all shown up. Oh, you're welcome. So I'm just going to start with a few slides just kind of summarizing the overall program, I-84 Hartford program, where we've kind of gone since October, where we are today in our kind of overall schedule. So since that working session, we focused a lot on defining and screening and designing the multimodal station. Many of you were at the PAC meeting in March, saw how we've now advanced. We're recommending right now that 2 of those station concepts, one of which is depicted here on the screen, we've recommended that 2 of those advance into the draft environmental impact statement. So that is moving forward. There is some ongoing architectural design and transportation planning within the station, looking at how spaces are used and those types of next steps that we'll be presenting to the advisory committee either in August or September here in the next couple months. We have adopted the Farmington Avenue extension as the option for that Trident local road area. We are continuing to evaluate 2 other options in the DEIS, but all the exhibits you'll see consistently here will illustrate that Farmington Avenue extension. We've conducted our level 3 screening, which I have a slide on here in a couple minutes, but we've really been focused on producing that draft environmental impact statement. So that document is due to DOT and Federal Highway this fall, and ultimately after a couple review cycles, it'll be published early next year, and then a public hearing follows for public comment on that document. So in terms of our big picture schedule, we're really right here just here in the beginning. So where that line is, we're still about a couple years away from that record of decision. So I did just want to kind of reinforce to everyone that final EIS, that record of decision terminology sounds very absolute and final, but over that intervening these years, this design period, and then again, if you draw your eye to that construction line in the late 2020s, there will be many opportunities for the design to evolve. If the design evolves in a manner where it potentially alters the environmental impacts, it will have to, the NEPA document, the DEIS, the record of decision, will need to be revisited. And DOT themselves, as that design progress proceeds, will have to reevaluate that NEPA document every 3 years to ensure we're still in compliance. So while I know that timeline and being 2 years away sounds very final, there is still a lot of evolving to be done with these designs over that period. And throughout that, you'll have the opportunity to attend meetings like this, to provide your input, and to help shape those designs that will impact the community. So I just wanted to summarize our screening process overall to date. We started with what we called level 1. That's where we looked at these 4 big picture alternatives, really kind of how are we going to construct this highway through the city. And ultimately, we eliminated the elevated highway, and we eliminated the tunneled highway alternatives. The elevated, we could not get the traffic operations to work acceptably, and we just felt that the tunnel was economically infeasible. So then we spent quite a bit of time in 2017 looking at the over 15 eastern interchange options on the east and 10 on the west, trying to really refine that to a reasonable number to be evaluated in the DEIS. And we really looked for fatal flaws, and ultimately we ended up with 3 eastern interchange options and 1 on the west. So just recently, we've arrived at 1 eastern interchange option, which I'll get to go through with you here in a second. We've also done some screening work looking at how the CT Fast Track Guideway could be reconstructed. The multimodal station I had already touched on, and the Trident as well. So again, there'll be a lot more discussion about the station and CT Fast Track at that next upcoming PAC meeting. For now, we'd really like to focus on the local roads. There'll be plenty of time to talk about the Trident, though, at this meeting today. So I'm going to spin off and just give you guys a little bit of the kind of our toolbox for how we've done this traffic analysis, kind of bring you up to speed with where we are and what we still have to do. So the first step to all this has been identifying background growth that was done several years ago in setting up our initial models. And that's about 6 to 7% total growth between now and the year 2040 being the design year. So there is a moderate increase no matter what we do with the road network, you will see that increase. Now, that is generally low, and we should say that those numbers were developed prior to several large projects being implemented. That includes the ballpark, that includes Dono North. So as we move through these next several years, we will be looking into updating those traffic models to ensure they reflect the best information we have. So we take that background growth and we use it in what's called the transportation demand model. And that allows us to dynamically assess how, if the travel network has changed, when we start moving ramps around, which is a big part of the lowered highway alternative, which I'll show you in a couple slides, it helps us evaluate where those routing patterns move to. So this model is very well calibrated to how the highways, how the local ramps work. However, the further we get away from those highway ramps into the local road network, it's not calibrated quite as well. And that's one of the things as we move forward into design, we'll start to work on. I should also say, though, we're going to cover in the next couple slides a concept called diversion. And so that's something where you'll start to see cars, the further we get away from those local road increases, they'll start to revert back to the norm. And I have an exhibit to help you understand that here in a couple slides. So first things first, this lowered highway alternative, because of the nature of it, it does require these significant changes to the local road network and to the ramp network. A lot of the ramps we have out there today are only feasible because the highway is elevated or splits into eastbound and westbound at different elevations. Our analysis in identifying the interchange options we have today, we're focused on identifying fatal flaws. We didn't want ramps to back up onto the freeway, and we established a bare minimum performance for traffic signals. That was an average of about 2 minutes of delay for each user of the intersection. So anything worse than that, we eliminated. The one thing I would like to highlight on this map is you can see these different red lines. These all depict new local street connections that are not there today. So one of these great opportunities we have with the lowered highway is because of its lessened footprint on the city, it enables us to open up space both for these new local roads and for potential economic development. So I'm pretty sure I said diversion a couple of minutes ago. Thanks for no one making a face at me. What I really meant to say was traffic dispersion. So this is something, this is a concept I was trying to get at a few minutes ago. And so if you think about, say, we've relocated, we're proposing ramps onto Laurel Street. That's something that a lot of you have raised in the last few weeks that have brought us here. So if you envision that would result in an increase in traffic volumes at that point. Call that the left part of this exhibit. So say that's 100 plus 100 vehicles. This is just kind of a qualitative exercise at this point. As you start to get further and further away from that location where the ramps come into, that traffic starts to disperse in different directions till you get to a point a few intersections away from those ramps, it's really reverted back to where normal background growth would have gotten you. So I'm going to come back to this concept later on as we talk about these different network changes and how we expect the traffic volumes to follow them. Some of the key principles we've adopted in establishing these designs are, first of all, utilizing complete streets approach on the local roads. We understand that by providing the necessary amenities for cyclists, for pedestrians, for transit users, we can encourage those who are willing to take other modes to get out of their cars and use these other modes of transportation that can lessen the demand on the network and create a more livable city. We also want to point out that I-84 is a freeway, not a local road. Right now, about 7% of trips during both peak periods utilize I-84 to get between exits in Hartford. Ultimately, we see the lowered highway design as discouraging folks from doing that. There are some locations right now that make it really easy to do that. And again, so we're proposing a local road network that will be capable of handling those 7% of trips off the highway. This will benefit both I-84 in terms of its operations, but many of these streets that will be carrying that traffic go through economic development areas. The extra eyes on the road there will help those businesses moving forward. We've also placed the ramps at locations that we feel optimize paths to high volume destinations. So that includes anchor institutions, some of the major employers, destinations like that. So we intend to use local roads that are intended to convey those higher traffic volumes to those destinations. I won't go through each of those bullets here, but generally speaking, the idea of this slide is to convey that we think the character and the travel speeds along these local roads defines them more than necessarily the volume. If you can create a street that is a pedestrian-friendly environment, a cyclist-friendly environment, and has features on it to help control travel speeds, that can go a great way to potentially offset some of these potential increases in volume. We do have some strategies. We actually presented them to Carol Padberg, one of the key stakeholders from ANA, last year. We have some slides we could go through. They're all set in the context of Laurel Street. This is Laurel Street over here. However, they really could apply to any of the locations in the project corridor. So the last couple slides here, I'm just going to walk you through again our lowered highway alternative, explain what some of the changes that are on the table are for both the west side of the corridor and the east side of the corridor. And then I'm going to turn it back to you guys and let you guys point us to what you want to talk about. So here in the western part of the corridor, we have Park Street here towards the bottom of the map. Here's Laurel, Sigourney towards the eastern part of the map. So again, we're proposing to start lowering the highway basically right when it crosses over Park Street. So it'll cross over Park Street like it does today, then start to descend into what we call that at-grade or cut section. Capitol Avenue will be reconstructed to pass over the CT Fast Track Guideway and the railroad, as well as I-84. Same thing with Laurel Street. It will now be constructed over I-84, whereas it's beneath I-84 today. And then I-84 will continue below Sidourney Street. So again, Sidourney Street, Laurel Street, Capitol Avenue, all above I-84, different from today. Meanwhile, we intend to reconfigure the Sisson Avenue interchange. Today, basically ramps from all four directions, that's eastbound and westbound on and off ramps, come all the way over here to Sisson Avenue at West Boulevard. We're proposing a much more compact interchange with eastbound off and on ramps to Laurel Street and westbound off and on ramps to Capitol Avenue. Meanwhile, in this part of the corridor, we have a relatively minor realignment of the railroad and CT Fast Track, which then would descend under the highway and under the railroad to cross to the southern side here and then extend easterly towards where it terminates today. So that's one of the bigger changes recently. Again, I don't want to spend a ton of time focusing on that. I just wanted to draw your attention to it here on the map. So I'm just going to flip. You can see here, again, I've highlighted the one new connection. That's a new local road that's not there today, extending from West Boulevard at Sisson Avenue to Hawthorne Street. So that's sort of a new parallel connection to Capitol Avenue. So we've come prepared. These are some of the things we've heard in the lead up to the meeting that we thought you might want to talk about. That includes those Laurel Street ramps and how travel patterns would likely change there in the western part of the corridor. And then Hawthorne Street, there have been some questions about the alignment of that. How could it be optimized to potentially facilitate economic development in that vacant parcel bounded by Forest and CT Fast Track and Hawthorne. Then moving over to the east, so we've shifted here. So this is Sidourney Street, the I-84 I-91 interchange. We just off the page over here. Here's Sidourney again. This is that Farmington Avenue extension we've talked a little bit about. Asylum Avenue, that new Garden Street extension. Here's High Street, right where it is today. So again, I-84 constructed at grade throughout this whole corridor. Beneath Sidourney Street, beneath Broad, beneath that new Farmington extension, Asylum, Garden Street extension. So basically, I-84 beneath every city street it crosses from after Park Street all the way to the I-91 interchange. Also on this map, we've depicted that Farmington extension here, new local road adjacent to Bushnell Park, connecting down towards where those Capitol Avenue ramps go today, new Garden Street extension. And in the red, we've depicted one of our multimodal station options. So that's the rail station would go right in Asylum, bus station in the area between Spruce and the highway. So again, just to highlight those new connections, there's that Farmington extension, Bushnell Park West, or Road A as we've called it, Spruce Street extended around to create one linear street, and then this new leg of Cogswell Street connecting to Edwards. So I'll flip back and forth slowly. So again, we have some locations to talk about here, how to, help you guys understand how we think travel patterns will change with that new interchange configuration. We just spent some time talking about the Trident area, Asylum Hill, and then we have some potential cross sections for what these new roadways crossing the highway could look like. We've identified complete streets elements that could be included on those at those locations. So just want to remind everyone, we'd like to keep the multimodal station, CT Fast Track, or this idea of potentially tunneling I-84 and I-91 to another time. There'll be plenty of opportunity for you to provide input on those things before any decisions are made. So with that, I'm going to ask Mike Morehouse to help me kind of moderate kind of interactive portion with you. That was the presenting, and we are kind of here. We have quite a bit more content that we can go through, but I definitely want to kind of respond to specific interests and questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's working. Good evening, everyone. So this is your meeting, as Casey said, and there's a lot of additional content in this presentation. We can take it in any direction you want. So I guess I'll just start off by asking you, what is the topic of interest that you'd like to begin speaking about tonight? Is there a specific area you want to talk about, or would Tony?
So the question I had in general was in analyzing these the options. How are the teams projecting mode share, especially with the massive investment in commuter rail, the kind of unknown disruptor of doctoral spike share, which has been a 10% load share shift in China. In the cities it's been unruled. And with CT Fast Track and CT Fast Track expansion. So how's that, we're looking at very, significant, traffic models, but there are assumptions in there around mode shift and the modes that are existing. Is there projections that are, looking at increased rail, looking at increased active transportation, looking at increased transit that goes along with the things that we're already seeing in other places?
Pat, welcome back from vacation. I'm just kidding. No. I'll start. Just correct me if I'm wrong. No. So that's a great question, Tony. Our current travel demand model does not really model mode shift very well. The model I talked about us starting, which will take us about 6 months to develop, will. Now, as that relates back to screening, as I said, we were targeting fatally flawed alternatives. These alternatives wouldn't work if you took 5 or 10% of traffic and shifted them to another mode. So we feel very confident in the screening decisions we've made to date, although we are very interested as all those exciting modes, the Hartford line and Fast Track continue to grow, of observing how they do encourage mode shift, and our future traffic models will take that into account.
Another question? Yes, Jennifer?
I have a lot of questions.
I'll give you the microphone.
So just remind me, the Sisson Avenue exit is going to go away, correct?
I would phrase it as it's going to be replaced with another exit, but yeah.
And how many
significantly changed.
cars use that exit now? Traffic count.
Point over to Nick.
Probably a couple thousand each peak.
Well, I don't know that. Okay. So if you're getting off to go to the hospital, how do you get to the hospital with the new way?
Sure, okay. So I can actually, we prepared a couple exhibits kind of with this idea in mind. So I'm going to skip through here just a second.
So a couple of thousand at peak, but the rest altogether, how many cars?
The whole day? Probably 20,000, give or take.
So
Seems like a lot of cars.
I'm going to use this map here to kind of illustrate. So you're trying to get to St. Francis from I-84 eastbound. We think you would use this new Laurel Street off-ramp, come up Laurel to Hawthorne to Sigourney.
So you'd overshoot the,
The new ramp to Laurel Street, turn left up Laurel, right on Hawthorne, left on Sigourney.
and then left on,
Yeah, right.
Or straight on Laurel, left on Nile, right on, there'd be a lot.
There are,
Earlier,
sure,
you spread
yeah,
out the,
exactly,
people make
yeah,
their choices.
exactly. It's
no,
a
I'm
grid-
just asking what would be the preferred, right now there's signs to the hospital, I think would there be the preferred route would be,
I think you would sign it the way I just drew it, given that those are what we call the higher classification roadways intended to carry that traffic volume. But we are a long way away from kind of finalizing that kind of final signing pattern for St. Francis Hospital.
just brings a lot more traffic into the neighborhood.
I just checked and it's, between all four ramps is 30,600. So 20,000 on the ramps to and from the east, 10,000 to and from the south.
And then downtown, the ramps that are getting closed,
The high and Trump Street.
yeah.
Let me add these up real quick for you.
Is that in both directions? I mean, are the ramps getting closed from 91 also?
No.
So
And
just eastbound?
Eastbound off, westbound on, and those add up to 14,000.
And which westbound on?
The Trumbull and High Street ramps, so they leave from Trumbull and High Street, eastbound they're signed for Ann Street and Main Street.
So where do those cars go downtown? Coming from,
We actually have some diagrams to show that.
So on the eastern, so I'm going to walk through instead of just trying to flip the one that just started. So we did kind of a whole set of these. So just to remind everyone today, so we're going to go by direction, and we're going to, in the morning we're going to look at the off ramps, in the evening we're going to look at the on ramps. That's sort of the general pattern. So in the morning we had our eastbound off ramp that splits, right? It goes down to Capitol and it goes to Asylum. So this graphic here, the weight of the line generally depicts the traffic volume. And you can kind of see how that starts to disperse. That's that whole theory I was talking about a little earlier. So the people using the Capitol Avenue ramp kind of tend to be going to this area down the Capitol. Folks coming up to Asylum actually kind of split evenly, half of them going downtown, half of them going up towards Asylum Hill. And then I also add to that, this is the Trumbull Street and the High Street ramp patterns combined. You can see they're destined more towards the CBD. So this is what we would replace it with. This is the eastbound off ramp to Bushnell Park West or Road A. And you can see a lot of the volume is now turning left and coming up to serve downtown and Asylum Hill. We're finding that a lot of the traffic destined for this Capitol area would likely take that Laurel Street exit, turn left, and then use Capitol Avenue to get in. That's not to say that they couldn't also, and there are some that turn right here and head down to Capitol. So it kind of offers two different ways to get to Capitol Avenue today.
and then the other, okay. So
Yep, I have three other directions to step through. So now getting on the highway eastbound in the afternoon, use the Broad Street on-ramp. You can see how much thicker that line is. It really carries a significant volume of traffic. So today you can see a big chunk of people filtering down through the Trident to turn left onto the ramp, and then many people coming up Capitol Avenue to get onto the ramp. We'd essentially be replacing that with an eastbound on-ramp from that Bushnell Park West. So you can see it's now drawing traffic along 4 different roadways. So it's really spreading the approach to that a little better and a little bit more manageably, but still primarily drawing from the same area, Asylum Hill, downtown, but not as much in these western parts of the neighborhood, because this western interchange is now much better configured to serve access to the highway there.
Casey, that one doesn't look like it's taking anybody from downtown. It looks like it's all,
To get east from downtown, you take.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. The folks from downtown, I believe, are taking the Morgan Street ramp. Now turning around, heading westbound. So this is in the morning, you have that off ramp to Asylum. You can see most of the folks using that headed off towards Asylum Hill, being replaced by that new off ramp to Edward Street. Kind of a similar pattern, although you can see this separates flows of traffic destined for major employment center at the Hartford, as well as that at Etna, kind of along 2 different roadways. Then getting back on the highway in the afternoon, you can see today the Trumbull and High Street ramps drawing that traffic from downtown and down from Walnut Street. The ramps that merge from Capitol and Asylum before they get on the highway, big chunk from near the Capitol and the southern portion of the CBD, some coming from Asylum Hill. And then the proposed condition, you can see the ramp really drawing most of its traffic from downtown up Walnut and then that Asylum Hill area. We imagine, or our model shows, the traffic from that Capitol Avenue area would utilize that new Capitol Avenue westbound on-ramp a little bit further to the west. Those are the kind of 4 cardinal directions here.
So the Trumbull Street, if you're coming from Windsor in the morning and take Trumbull Street, is that,
Unchanged.
oh, that is unchanged, okay.
The off-ramp from 91 is not being modified at all. Folks coming from the north and the south, unless they're going kind of west of Union Station would be unlikely to change their route due to these specific changes to I-84.
And quick question, Casey, do these, I know these reflect sort of the magnitude of volume, not, actual numbers, but does this include that 7% background growth as well as any traffic that's changed as a result of the ramp reconfigurations?
Yeah, these existing ones are really actually showing the no-build volumes rather than the existing.
Is it possible to get copies of these?
I was thinking the same thing, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
So study them.
yeah, of course. Yeah, was that all clear? Or not really?
Well, some of it, but I got lost after a bit.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, I think, one of the stories of all this is that, the patterns are going to change no matter what. If this project happens or if it doesn't. I mean, look what happened when the baseball stadium goes in. Anytime a development goes in, traffic patterns change. And I think the philosophy that the team and the DOT took was to really try to minimize the impact of change. And like Casey said, direct the traffic on the roads that can handle it, then design the new roads to absorb some of the overflow. There's new network now. And then for any areas where there may be some localized diversion into the neighborhoods, make sure we treat those streets in a complete streets way so that we might discourage any kind of traffic cut through or make it better for bicycling and pedestrian. That goes to Tony's comment too. I think you're right, these traffic models right now don't do a good job of predicting that shift to different modes. And as we're already seeing in Hartford with Lime Bike and all the new transportation options, things can be completely different by the time this actual highway project goes in. And Casey, you had mentioned that the refined model that you're working on is going to do a better job of predicting that.
Yeah, that's right. The new model will be able to factor in mode shift both to the rail, CT Fast Track, paths make it. Thank you. Yeah, so that's right. Good.
And new model is a new type of software that also will be able to predict more accurately how traffic behaves at intersections, as well as the impacts. If someone, let's say, does on-street parking, you'll be able to model that and impact what kind of delays.
So is it fair to say that what we're showing here, even though there's not numbers on it, that this may even reflect a worst case traffic condition?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Jackie, and then Tony.
I'm one of the 7%. I get on the highway and off.
Shame on you.
I know. One of the reasons I'm gonna really miss out, that
Yeah.
when you get rid of my exits. But one of the reasons I get on and off a lot is now bicycle people don't yell at me. I hate going down Broad Street because the bicycle lane, I'm gonna make a right-hand turn and the bike lanes zigzag around there. And and half the time it's on my, it's a blind side, you can't see. And it makes me a nervous wreck, so I don't use that part of Broad Street, particularly during high traffic hours. Now, I understand that you're supposed to be more grateful to have bicycles share the street with bicycles, but I don't want to run a bicycle over, so I get on the highway. The reason I tell you my story, I can't be the only one that has these problems, and that are we going to take that in consideration? If you're going to route people like me back, get us off the highway, back onto the streets, it has to be compatible. The bikes and the people and the cars have to be compatible. You can't have bike lanes, even if you paint them bright green, zigzagging in and out of the, in a block. There's a lot of zigzagging that goes on there.
So there are several locations where the roadways have high traffic volumes, high turning volumes, or are on steep grades, where we're intending to provide what are called either buffered bike lanes or off-street bike lanes to help minimize those situations which are dangerous both for cyclists and obviously cause anxiety for drivers as well. And I know there's been thinking within the industry about the right way to handle those. You're specifically talking about that right turn lane on Broad Street where the bike lane cuts over. I know there's been a lot of talk in our industry about how the safest way to handle that is. And I think by the time we're really drawing this up for construction in 5 to 10 years time, there could be evolution in exactly how that's handled, and it may not be done the exact same way you see today.
But I think we need to keep that in consideration.
Sure, absolutely.
If you want, okay, we're going to take people like me off the highways. But that's one of the reasons I'm on the highway, so. Well, I probably won't be driving, so. But that's another story.
I just wanted to clarify your comments about your growth assumptions. Did you say that you were assuming a 7% growth in traffic volume by 2040?
Yes, total, not annual. So it's just total volume growth by that point.
I'm wondering where that came from. I mean, I remember when we started this, that Rich said that there would be a 1% growth assumption, and I don't know if it was yearly or over a period of time. And I sort of grumbled at the time and thought, let's just assume 0. Why not just, I mean, this business of calculating traffic volume is so dependent on outside stuff you can't measure, and in particular, if you, what's it called, induced traffic? And if
induced demand.
The more you build, the more they come. What if you just took a policy decision that you were assuming no growth, particularly in light of all the alternative modes that we suddenly have? And you're not going to encourage any improvement for automobiles. Can you do that? And I have a related question, sort of related. All this talk about raised separated bike lanes, are you going to be acquiring additional right-of-way on local roads in order to provide for that? Because there isn't enough there now.
Yeah, the locations where those are generally proposed are, for example, the newer section of Capitol Avenue, which is basically being reconstructed without much on either side of it. That new Bushnell Park West, the reconstruction of Laurel Street. Generally, it's in locations where additional property would not be required to facilitate those. Obviously, if it came to a location where we had to make a decision, we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. But at this point, I don't think we've been boxed into that. As for the growth question, I'll take a start at an answer, and then I'll turn you over to Pat. I mean, so very early in 2012, 2013, when we first set up the traffic model, we did work closely with both the region, PROG, and DOT's planning department as we set up the growth assumptions. And I believe some of those questions may be revisited as we start to refresh the design model this year. Pat, do you remember what the percent annual we used was?
So the annual percent growth was 0.1%, so you were very close, which averages to about 6-7% over the entire between 2012 and 2040. So that's you were right. It's a 0.1 versus 1, and then over the entire year it's about 6%. As far as traffic growth goes, it's not that we are predicting the way the model is built. You're looking at forecasting the population, employment, a few other social, economic, and demographic information that influences how many people will be driving, and that feeds into the model and predicts the traffic patterns and the traffic. So it's not that we're...
But if at the same time, mode shifts are occurring naturally,
Yes.
how do you figure that out?
So we also feed in the existing, we did a survey a few years ago, 2 years ago, and we looked at the patterns of transit users and their willingness to use it even more with changes to having universal card, making it more affordable, with changes to the actual route patterns, how many more people will shift over to bus system. So using all of that statistical information, we feed it into the model and we predict it based on that.
Tony, if I could just.
I don't have a lot of faith in the model, is what I'm saying. The more you assume, the more you get.
Yeah, but I think the good news of all this is that even with that growth, the department and the teams decided not to add any capacity to the highway. In fact, the highway is going to be smaller than it is today. So again, I think you can look at some of this growth as almost a worst case scenario. We don't believe the region's going to grow by leaps and bounds, but it is going to grow. And the model's reflecting that growth. But I think keeping the highway to the capacity it's at today and narrowing it, I think was a huge achievement. And so it's pretty much the same as assuming a zero growth. But to some of these local distributions, will they ever happen that way? Right now, with the growth rate that's in there, that's the way the model predicts it. But if we do have more robust shift to bus, rail, and bike, it's only going to make it better. And furthermore, if we design the streets like this, we're going to encourage that. So, I think there's only, in my opinion, this is all really good news. We can forecast out a bit of growth. We know the network can handle it, but that's not the outcome that we have to live with if we all make different choices. No, it's all right.
Just a personal view, and that is that those blue lines that show the relative volume of traffic coming in and going out is enormously helpful to me.
Good job, Nick.
Yeah, Nick worked hard on those. We have a comment in the back here.
This is somewhat unrelated, but I've taken a whole bunch of grief about the stone viaduct that's going to be encircling, or that currently is encircling Bushy Park. And there was recently an article in the Current about utilizing that as in part for the fast track, which didn't make any sense to me. Am I missing something? And what's your current thinking on either maintaining it or getting rid of it?
So this is sort of a rabbit hole conversation, and I appreciate your brief. I mean, it could very well take up the next.
Never.
It just could take up the. We want to make sure we let We'd be happy to kind of discuss that towards the end of the meeting, but I think we'd like to.
I agree.
Okay. No, that question will be answered before any decisions are made on the final disposition of Fast Track.
Tony and I have to fight that.
We'll get the jumbo boxing gloves for you.
Hi, just picking up on Mike's comment that the highway will be smaller and that's a good thing. I raised the issue of how you can claim that this is an improvement to the interstate highway system if you don't deal with the congestion that exists today and is predicted to exist for 50 years to come if we don't do something about this highway. It appears to me, with all due respect, and I've worked with a lot of you people for a long time, that this interstate highway project has been hijacked and turned into an urban renewal program. The federal government, with the money that's paid on fuel taxes and all kinds of other things, is going to handle the volume, the major cost of this whole thing. Hartford and Hartford residents don't put anything specifically in from the local government. The state will kick in some money. There's a fatal flaw in all this. There's no cake. It's all frosting. And I cannot believe that the Federal Highway Administration would go ahead and approve a project that guarantees continued congestion on one of the most congested intersections in all of New England today. So, these are all wonderful plans, but the problem is the highway. And this doesn't do anything to solve that problem.
So I would just note that we are expecting to see improved level of service on I-84, both directions, both peak periods. In particular, relatively dramatic improvements in the morning peak period, and still some improvements in the evening peak period. We do, you mentioned intersection, and the I-84, I-91 interchange is sort of the elephant hanging off our right shoulder there, so to speak. The DOT has initiated a separate planning study looking at that, and that is advancing on its own timeline to look to address that bottleneck. We are working with and are the team, and so we are intending to keep our design in parallel, in a sense that we are understanding changes to our design, how it could affect that potential study as it evolves. But again, just to say, the current projections do forecast improvements in level of service on I-84. Now, to Mike's point, that's not because we've added capacity, it's because we've improved operations, better spacing between the off-ramps, better weaving conditions, and the provision of 10-foot shoulders, which doesn't just help our calculated daily levels of service, but could dramatically improve levels of service during incidents where currently there is no shoulder, the vehicle occupies a travel lane. So during those that non-recurring congestion, we do believe will be significantly improved by just even the provision of the shoulders.
Just one more comment on that. And what this, as Jackie could attest to, people are using the highway as a local road. And so, the people who live in Hartford are going to be impacted, whether they pay to this improvement or not, because the Federal Highway Administration wants to preserve the highway for the longer distance travel. They don't want it to be used as a local road. So this design, in effect, is going to be driving people off the highway and back into the city grid, quite frankly, where it belongs, which will make the highway more efficient, which will preserve that throughput for freight and other longer distance uses. But in order to do that, we have to make these roads better and safer for everybody downtown. So if traffic is going to be now getting off the highway and using the local parallel arterials, they have to, they have to be controlled in speed. They have to provide other opportunities to get around for bikes and for pedestrians. So I think there's a lot this design really does. You don't have to add another lane to effectively, give you more capacity. You can get more efficiency out of the existing system, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I just wanted to point out that in the city of Hartford, involving multimodal transit and active transportation is absolutely critical to this project, not as some giveaway redevelopment program, but as a recognition that over 30% of households in Hartford do not own a car. In the neighborhood just north of the project corridor in Clay Arsenal, 50% of households do not own a car. And nearby in the Albany Avenue corridor, 42% of households do not own a car. And that is even before we have a system that deals with that competently. So I just wanted to make a point that those numbers are significant.
My understanding is that about over 75,000 people come into Hartford to work every day. I believe the number is somewhere there or above it.
Do you know how many Connecticut state office workers, what percentage they pose for that? Who could be, if encouraged, taking public transportation?
You mean once they get free parking?
I do not know that answer, but
that's what I mean.
In their union contract.
Well, the labor contracts have to be
And no
negotiated.
It doesn't matter. I'm not asking about that. What I'm just saying is that if it's a real problem, and the DOT is a state organization, and these other state employees come in, there are quite a number of them, getting them off the highway would help truck transportation as well.
okay. Sandy.
Do you have visuals of complete streets with particular emphasis on bike access so that Jackie doesn't hit us? Because I don't take that on my bike either, that weavy one.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. You don't like it there either? Oh, hell no. Okay.
So we do have a set of typical sections taking it some different locations along the individual roadways. This is Capitol Avenue, kind of in front of where those DAS buildings are. And so you can see the intent here is to provide a bike lane on both sides of the street.
I don't think you have that width.
You don't have
You don't have that width.
It's not even a setback you could take.
I
I'm
think
not-
today
I'm driving it.
Capitol Avenue is 2 lanes in each direction. This is proposing what is effectively a road diet where it would have 1 lane
Wait,
in
you're
each
talking-
direction.
You're talking about the section like from Laurel, like,
No, east of there, like from like Broad Street, past Flower, past the DAS building.
right, that's where you don't, right now, there's 1 lane in each direction. There's parking lane on one side.
Well, but then at rush hour, parking is forbidden, and it's 4
No.
lanes.
No.
On Capitol Avenue?
Yeah, there's a
Capitol
sign.
Avenue where the improvement was just done.
Oh, no, past the.
Park Terrace to,
But
but what I'm saying is if, like, when you show the maps that indicated, oh, people from downtown who are going to the Capitol area, they're all gonna use that Laurel exit, and they're not going to disperse off of Capitol. They're all gonna come down Capitol to, that south end of downtown. That's what your maps were showing, and I think where you're going to have a problem is from Park Terrace to Broad.
Absolutely.
You don't have the width, and you also, the character of those blocks is very different than the character of where you get off of the highway onto Capitol today. You have some wide streets before you head down to Washington or whatever. So I just think that's an area you really need to look at, because you just do not have the width.
I was driving Capitol Avenue today in conjunction with preparing a comment on the bike lane currently proposed. And I noticed there are 5 lanes in front of the Capitol and the State Supreme Court building. No bike lanes. There are turn lanes, lots of lanes there. The minute you get west of Broad Street and up to Laurel, and particularly where there's this nice reviving commercial area right on the sidewalk, you don't have half that. You just don't have it in the public right of way. The only way you're gonna get it is to knock down buildings, and that's not gonna happen. So, I mean, this is pretty glib. It doesn't recognize the reality.
So I do have a map that illustrates this.
I'd like to add to that Medicaid transit buses park in the bike lane slots sometimes when they're waiting for their number to be called.
They've been doing better. They wait on Forest.
I think you want Capitol too. And on Sigourney, right on the ramp, by the ramp.
I mean, this doesn't necessarily get down to the level of detail that allows you to maybe be satisfied by my answer, but I can tell you we were reviewing potentially impacted 4F properties by the foot today, and because this whole Fraud Hollow neighborhood is a historic resource, we looked very closely here, and I can confirm that the proposed cross-section fits right up to the property lines. It really fits within the existing sidewalks.
This one here?
This one here.
I'll tell you, having worked on the Capitol Avenue redesign, you've got a 6-foot sidewalk on the south side of the street. And
Sandy, it's
that's-
potential that the parking lane maybe is not depicted here on, oh, you guys can't even see my street, but yeah.
The aerial. It looks like it may be an older aerial, but it looks like it's 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, without shoulders on Capitol, right around the DAS.
Right, and that's the on-the-ground situation is different. And even those 4 lanes, that's a pretty doggone narrow 4 lanes.
Are they 10s or 11s, Sandy? Do you know?
Oh, they're not 11s.
They're
And you'd
10s.
be lucky if they were 10s, I think. Do you know,
Right.
Kevin?
I think the mistake, I want to get back to the original question too, but I think maybe the error is this parking lane. This might be a typical, and there might be places where parking can exist, but maybe in the space you're talking about, it just simply can't. But I think this cross-section depicted the removal of one lane and converting that to bike lanes. We'll revisit these typicals, but I think what Casey was going to show was a series of different treatments for bicycle accommodation. So we want to slow the traffic down first of all. And that's one of the biggest safety improvements we can make for cyclists. But as Casey said, there's areas in the city where we're looking at cycle tracks off to the side or protected bicycle lanes. On the slower, lower volume street, bicycle lanes may be sufficient. But we're trying to include some high level of bicycle accommodation in almost every street that we're touching, we're reconfiguring. So there's a range of treatments, protected intersections in some locations as well, right, Casey?
You might be able to do that near the highway where you're going to be tearing up everything anyway. There's no place else in the city that has that kind of right of way. Maybe North Main Street. I mean, there's just a couple of arterials that even begin to have adequate right-of-way to do anything like this.
How do you want to resolve the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is where I kind of relate back a little bit to our stage of design, right? We talking about construction in 2028, design from 2020 till then. I mean, there are a lot of things we don't know. And, I know Nick's looked closely at that corridor, and I know he's confident in the lane arrangement he's proposed. There is, like Mike said, the potential that parking lane is just extra. That looked like it's probably correct. We'll certainly be revisiting these over many years as we evolve this design. We're certainly going to make sure, to Sandy's point, that if we're demonstrating that traffic is using an arterial to get somewhere, that we're accommodating it. But again, the intent is to provide as many of these cyclist pedestrian amenities as possible.
Could you address the Trident area if we're through with this?
Sure. Would you like me to jump there now, or do you want me to carry through with some of these cross sections?
Yeah, are we through with it, or what else would you like to know about the bicycle?
I'm fine moving beyond the cross sections, believe me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's really, do you expect, is the intention on, since we live sort of in the middle of all of those on-ramps, is the intention that there will actually be bicycle access that feels safe and you won't feel like if you're driving, you're endangering all those line bikers?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. This is Sigourney Street, for example. Again, we're really just adopting what DOT's prepared and is advancing here with a two-way cycle track off the side of the street. So this is a location where on the right side of Sigourney Street, as you're looking north, of course, you'd have those two highway on and off ramps. So the idea here being to provide that two-way cycle track on the other side of the street. I can tell you we've got something similar proposed for Road A or Bushnell Park West, where we again provide this on the other side of the ramp. So this is a way to separate cyclists away from those ramps. But yeah, I mean, just consistently we are looking to do exactly what you say, provide safe environment for cyclists and comfort level for drivers as well.
I think we want to shift over to the Trident now?
Can I just ask one question about
Yeah.
Hawthorne? So if you're moving the bus station, does that mean the buses won't be on Hawthorne?
The question was if on Hawthorne Street, or if you're moving the bus station, does that mean the buses won't be on Hawthorne?
The Sigourney Street fast track station, is that right? So the ultimate final condition of that Sigourney Street station is yet to be decided. We're continuing to work with DOT's public trans arm on that. There have been some suggestions that it could potentially be removed and replaced with a station on the south side of the highway. That's where the busway could potentially be realigned. We haven't really decided that yet.
And are you doing work on the Hawthorne-Sigourney intersection? If it's now going to not be like a local street on a major access road?
Yeah, we have looked at potentially adding a lane to Hawthorne Street there as it approaches Sigourney Street, just that little section there to provide some extra capacity at the intersection.
Be interested in more details on that.
Sure.
Well, we're going to just take a minute to go through the the Trident, and then we'll get to you? Okay, thanks.
So the Trident, everybody's favorite topic. I've been using this little image here for like 2 years now. So one of the big things I do always like to point out when we start talking about it are the significant changes we expect to see in how folks will flow through this series of intersections, particularly in the afternoon when you have today with the Broad Street on-ramp right here, large volumes kind of flowing down through onto Broad Street to get to that on-ramp. And now, of course, with that ramp moved over to Bushnell Park West, we do see some changes in directionality and priority through that corridor. Now we're seeing in the PM today, it's kind of mixed, about half and half or close to there, with east-west traffic versus traffic coming north-south. Under the proposed lowered highway, we do see much more traffic being east-west. That said, we have considered many concepts here. We've been through a dramatic range from kind of crazy roundabouts that look like sea creatures to cutting roads off to one-way to all these different things we've tried. I would say we've really analyzed 5 in detail. The roundabout we talked about at one of our advisory committee meetings. We've talked about at some of these local street working sessions. Ultimately, the traffic volume is just a little bit higher than a roundabout or a single lane or even a turbo roundabout can really handle with a manageable number of lanes. So ultimately, we'd laid that out for you guys, and it looked very complex, difficult for pedestrians to cross. There may even have needed to be pedestrian signals on some of the approaches. So ultimately, we just didn't really feel like it was the right solution. We'd also talked about an idea of a western shift where we would push the intersection of Farmington and Asylum further to the west and then have one street coming to a 4-way intersection with Broad and Cogswell. Ultimately, under NEPA, that would have required an additional property acquisition, and as things have to be stacked up against NEPA, it just didn't pass muster. Just on that basis alone, it also would have been pretty sizable, not really pedestrian cyclist friendly, but ultimately that was ruled out as well. So that now leaves us with 3 options that we are carrying forward for continued evaluation in the DEIS. That's the Farmington Avenue extension, the discontinuous Broad Street, and what will be a new one to many folks around here, although it's really an old one, the idea of just improving the signalization at the 3 primary intersections, keeping all the streets open, keeping everything 2-way. Ultimately, that had been something we didn't really find favorable early in the project, but the implementation of that Garden Street could potentially reduce traffic volumes enough to make that manageable. So I can walk through the 3 just to make sure everyone understands. So it's our Farmington Avenue extension. It's something that was ultimately proposed by the city and their consultant team, something that they feel really could help generate economic development on these parcels here to the east of I-84 that are currently occupied by the freeway on and off ramps that could be vacated by this project. So the idea here is we take Farmington Avenue, and then before it gets to the Trident area today, we start to swing it down to the south and intersect it with that Bushnell Park West. Broad Street is continuous across. This curve does not require impacts to any of the properties, specifically that YMCA, or YWCA. It does not impact that. It does provide this extra connection across the highway. We are continuing to assess how the travel patterns work. We are seeing that a large number of people headed along Farmington Avenue will want to make this type of a maneuver, which is a little less efficient than we like. However, others will point out that it does create an extra path to head towards the southern part of downtown. So we are continuing to, and we feel that our next generation traffic model will really help us look at these 3 remaining Trident alternatives at a higher level than we've been able to yet.
That difficult maneuver would have to be performed by major bus routes also.
That's right.
Essentially changing from going downtown, changing from a left lane to a right lane to take that right
curve or vice versa?
No, it's a good point, given the high. We have considered that potentially buses would be encouraged to use Asylum Place to do that maneuver in a little bit less physically constrained area, and maybe that way they're set up approaching the intersection of Asylum and Codswell a little bit better. But that is a good point. Truckers as well. This map makes that area look a little bit smaller than it really is, but that's a fair point as well about trucks in that short area between Asylum and Farmington. So the second option we've talked about this kind of since last summer is the idea of making Broad Street discontinuous. This kind of came out sort of the optimal traffic performance scenario where it takes these three intersections would now all be signalized. Remember, today Asylum at Farmington, that little split there isn't really signalized, which is an interesting condition. So it would be signalized under this. So you basically have three-way traffic signals, which from an operations perspective would work fairly well, would allow some smaller roadway cross sections. However, Broad Street would be not accessible to cars between Asylum and Farmington. We would look to provide bicyclist pedestrian connections through there, but still vehicles would not be able to make that connection today, would have to seek alternate routes. There are some potentially available up this Bushnell Park West and Garden Street, or down around via Asylum Place as well, but we have heard relatively frequently about the displeasure with the severing of Broad Street, so we are mindful of that and keeping some of these other options on the table as well. Lastly, we've really brought this quote-unquote improved trident back to the table recently, which would again require signalization of all these three intersections. So that's Broad at Farmington, Farmington at Asylum, Asylum at Codswell. And we're seeing basically here with the new road network under the lowered highway, and this change has really come since we had this idea for the city's consultant gave us this idea for the Garden Street extension, that pulls some of that traffic volume out of this intersection and allows maintaining that existing configuration in this fashion. We did look at several sort of sub-alternatives to this where the traffic performance could be optimized a little bit by making some of these segments one way. We are conscious, however, that in an urban environment, it's not really desirable to introduce short segments of one-way streets. So when we talk about the improved trident at this point, we are thinking that these roadways would be bidirectional. So just a little summary here. You know, our recent work since that October meeting really focused on identifying a geometry for the Farmington extension and a configuration of intersection spacings that we felt worked and was not fatally flawed, and we're there. And that's why we've adopted that now on all the exhibits you're seeing. But we are continue to evaluate that discontinuous Broad as well as the improved trident, and we have prepared what we call our level 3 screening documents, which have been presented to DOT, Federal Highway, and several others. So that's what they heard is basically what you heard.
So Bob, did you have a specific question on the trident?
No, I had heard the discontinuation of Broad Street and the roundabout. I was wondering what happened to them. I'm thinking if you get rid of, if at least people coming from the east, they can get onto Bushnell Park West off of, say, Capitol instead of going all the way down Broad Street and expecting to go all the way through. So I think that the Bushnell West and the Garden Street extension and getting rid of the off-ramp onto Asylum, that should make that whole area easier to maneuver, I would think.
Yeah, I agree with you, yeah.
Just curious, you're talking about signals on all three of those, and I would assume that they'd probably be coordinated. But
really?
Well, just doing something. But I'm thinking, by the time all of this materializes, I would think that signals by then would be advanced enough that they'd be, connected to cameras and they could observe existing conditions and computer controlled to. Is there any thought with how much more efficient that might make some of these intersections and what that might do to the modeling?
All right, yeah, so right now the city currently has a computerized signal system that was intended to do a lot of that stuff, but it was built over 30 years ago. So obviously computers have progressed a long way since then. A lot of other countries have made great strides forward in what they call adaptive signal systems, doing exactly the same sort of thing that you said. In fact, cameras are kind of the new de facto standard for detecting vehicles versus the old loops that are cut into the pavement. So that offers a lot more options when it comes to traffic signal timing. So basically, as part of this, we are replacing the traffic signals in the vicinity of the highway. Chances are it'll be with a much more capable signal controller than what we have out there today. Whether that's tying into the city's existing computerized signal system or something that's built brand new is still up in the air. But basically, the capabilities will be there. I couldn't tell you what percentage improvement in traffic flow that would give you.
Good observation, though. Yes, Jack.
Well, this goes with the whole thing, this issue about what to do with Garden Street, too.
Just hold it here for you.
Okay, all right. What to do? I haven't, I think it's important to consider Broad Street to Garden Street. That's our, one of the few north to south roads we have. And I just get really nervous breaking that up. Yeah, we can improve the signal system, whatever, but it's like one of those things that I'm afraid we're going to do and regret it. You know, people 10 years from now think we were all brain dead. Why did you do this? It's because we don't have many north to south roads. And to chop it up so you have to go around, I don't think the fact that we have the newer roads is justification for chopping up that road.
I think that's a fair point. I think that's why this this option's back on the table.
Yeah.
Was the roundabout too tight? Is that why you eliminated that?
It's too big.
It was too big and complicated. I can zoom in on it, actually. So it had a total of 19 lanes combined in all the approaches. Yeah. Like I said, this is the mythic sea creature here. It's Medusa's ugly twin.
We're all big fans of roundabouts on this team, but there's just some places that don't work well, and this is prime example.
We just thought the driver confusion, and like I said, the approaches are so wide, you basically have to signalize them, which would then defeat the purpose of a roundabout if every single one of the approaches was potentially being tripped by a pedestrian signal, which, I mean, remember, this is also going to be in direct proximity likelihood to where the multimodal station will be, so lots of people will be crossing. Yeah.
Other questions on the Trident? I know you had a question back there. I haven't forgotten about you. Okay.
Back to Sigourney Street. I saw that you had an extra bike lane in addition to what's already there. We already only have a foot to put snow on. Where's that bike lane going to go? And where's the snow going to go?
Oh. That's interesting.
Snow? In 20 years,
So
we're not going to snow.
The Sigourney Street Bridge will be completely reconstructed as part of this. So if this does indeed represent additional width than is out there today, in our minds, there's no reason why we can't provide that. What was it? So it was that we're now providing 6 feet between the curb and the cycle track. Is that your question? Was how much space is there to store snow?
How far does that extend up? How far north does that affect Sigourney Street?
I think the intent would be, as DOT is, to carry the two-way cycle track through Farmington Avenue. Whether the cross-section could be quite this generous in terms of a buffer area once we get past the bridge, it very well may not be able to. I do know that as we approach the intersection at Farmington, we don't have 2 lanes in each direction southbound. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There are currently 2 lanes, but they're only 9-foot lanes.
Oh, gotcha.
And
Lovely.
it was fast track generally takes the whole lane.
Gotcha. So I can't commit to the 6-foot buffer
So
areas.
it's definitely by the time you get to Asylum, that this is not.
Yeah, I know for a fact that that block between Farmington and Asylum is extremely narrow. I do know that, yeah.
Would there be any talk of making that one lane, one travel lane and making?
I think we would be open to anything that would work and something like that if it could be proven to support what we're expecting to see. I think that's what's going to have to continue to evolve. I mean, it kind of plays back a little bit too to the reconfiguration of the Western Interchange. Does that change how some folks use Sigourney Street to get to points north? And we'll just have to be very mindful of that. But that's certainly something we'd be willing to consider and evaluate.
Because I've been behind the buses and they just take the whole lane, a lot of the time. Not all of them, but most of them.
You're meaning that they take up like both lanes, so you can't go
Well,
past them? Or?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
When they cross Asylum, they kind of go like this, just, they pick up and then they kind of spread out.
Gotcha.
You had another question?
Different question, yes. Okay, so this is, he had mentioned about the breakdown lanes on the eastbound. In fact, coming from Manchester today, there was a car accident and of course traffic was all backed up all the way. So are you saying that the improved highway would include more space, shoulder space, so that traffic accidents could move aside and that the traffic would flow a little better?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So right now, the shoulders in I-84 kind of range from being non-existent to 4 feet, the occasional, really wide 8-foot stretch, but for a very limited amount of length. So we're proposing a minimum of 10 foot. So 10 foot is kind of is the minimum standard for a freeway. We are evaluating whether we could potentially fit 12-foot shoulders due to some of the higher truck volumes in the corridor. And our preliminary look is we're very well likely able to do that.
It's interesting, when we talk about congestion on the highway, and I don't know if everybody realizes it, but there's, I think, 2 crashes a day along this section of highway somewhere. There's a lot of this congestion that's just being created by incidents that can't be cleared. Just the fact that we're going to have a shoulder is going to make a huge difference. Yeah.
Different question. Speaking about Garden Street, I know that there was some discussion about closing Garden Street or whatever. I don't know, where are you on it?
Not a lot has changed for us since that presentation we made at ANA in March. We've kind of let the city guide and frame that conversation about potentially closing the city street, and to our knowledge at this point, their position remains they don't want to see any local streets closed. So at this point, that's where we are. We do not envision our project actively doing that. If a separate project were to be moved forward by the city, we would react to and account for that.
Could you go back to the image of the improved trident that you had there? Yeah. So, and now, right, the road that appears to go right to the left of the highway there, is that the way? Is that going to be there, or is that what's there now?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's the relocated railroad.
Ah. Okay.
So this is where, so the rail line today,
Yeah,
right,
that
comes
would've
over
made a
here,
great route to do.
Union Station, and like that. So this is where it will be relocated to, sort of the very first part of the project.
Okay. Gotcha.
Unrelated question or comment. I don't know if, I mean, it may be just my imagination, but it seems like since the Hartford line has come into play, that the traffic on Spruce Street at certain times of the day, like when a train arrives or departs, is really a lot different than it was before. Like mass pandemonium, people making U-turns, 20 to 30 cars parked on the street, I just wondered if the multimodal people were observing and maybe taking any of that into consideration.
That's a good point. So we did, Pat was actually one of the ambassadors for that first weekend and did kind of get to observe some of the...
Yes, so Connecticut DOT actually will be collecting additional traffic count data, traffic information at major stations just to ensure that the roads can handle the additional traffic.
Well, I guess I'm more concerned about the proposed, drop-off for the news,
Right.
the mode.
So with the traffic projections and forecasts, we accounted for the additional.
We are looking at about trebling that. There's about 10 spaces really on Spruce Street. We're looking at providing a minimum of 30, and I think if we need to, we can certainly send some folks out to observe what's going on Spruce Street now that it's started and make sure that we're accounting for the correct number.
And the garage and the parking lot has been full a couple times already.
Gotcha. The multimodal station would provide
Yeah.
a pretty significant increase in capacity.
Any different areas you guys want to talk about? Is there something we haven't covered yet?
If we could just have, like Jennifer says, put a map so I can study it more.
Will this be available up on the website? Yes?
Not
Okay.
a map, but put it on paper.
Yeah. You'll have access to the website, to the presentation on the website. We'll make sure that that's available. You guys all anxious to get back out in the heat? All right, well, thank you for coming. Hopefully this was very informative, and feel free to come up and, informally speak with us after the meeting as well.
My name is J. Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.